Hey everybody, welcome back to the Meaning Forge. I wanted to take a moment and explain to you how grateful I am for you watching this content. I'm also extremely grateful for the interviewees and the people who've taken part in this Meaning Forge process. This entire experience has been extremely meaningful for me, and as in a way, really listening and connecting with these people has empowered me, influenced me, and is constantly inspiring me. I want to take a moment and thank everybody who watches and who comes on the Meaning Forge. And remember, this content is for everybody. I want to find meaning in how we make meaning in our life. I want to tackle one of the hardest questions known to man. And it is so hard because everybody has a different method for it. So hopefully together we can find some underlying motif on how we find and make meaning in our life. I invite you to always like, comment, and subscribe. Share this content. Take snippets out and clips and share with your family and friends. Go to the final words or go to the sections for the hammer, the sword, the pen, and the crown. And pull out what is most impactful to you, what really speaks to you, and share that. Watch out for Meaning Forge as we expand onto other podcast platforms, which will soon be in the descriptions for all interviews. Again, I invite you in this journey with me. Let's tackle the hard questions. Let's figure out how we make meaning. And let's figure out how we can be better people and forge individuals. Enjoy the interview. Welcome back to the Meaning Forge. I'm your host, Jim. Today, I am joined by Sean M. Sullivan, who's currently aiming to become a clinical psychologist. He currently has a background in competency restoration group therapy and is a qualified mental health professional for the State Department of Corrections. He also has his own podcast called Sean M. Sullivan Podcast, which he tackles a series of topics to include book reviews and current events. So, Sean, welcome to the Meaning Forge. It's about time, isn't it?
Thank you for the invitation. And yes, it is. You've been a guest on my podcast several times, and now here I am in your domain.
Absolutely. I'm privileged to have you here. And we've talked about a lot of the same subjects, actually. Mm-hmm. We just have different methodologies of doing it. And you take it from a different perspective, and I have a different perspective, and it's cool to kind of start bringing these together. So before we start getting, crazy, I guess I'm just going to open the floor up for a little bit. Like, if Sean Sullivan has a story, a personal narrative as to right now, could you tell our guest and our audience a little bit about that?
It would be the story of a of a young man who was very creative and very imaginative and wanted to be a big rock star, be somebody who was famous, and that didn't work out so well. And so after, my 20s pursuing that to no avail, I decided to go to college and I originally started doing IT. I wanted to do information technology because that's where a lot of the big paying jobs are, but I had no interest in it. And so during the general ed part of my associate's degree, I took Psych 101, and that kind of sucked me in. I kind of decided to pursue that.
I guess what was the major reason that drew you into rock and roll? Or is it rock and roll, or is it other stuff? Because I think in our conversations, it's been a little less rock and roll and more like heavy metal.
More like heavy metal, yeah. That's correct. Heavy metal. What drew me to heavy metal was, growing up, bullied and smaller than most males my age. Moved around a lot as a kid. My father's work with the West Virginia Division of Corrections growing up, and then before that he was in the Navy, so a lot of moving around. So I didn't really have a chance to cement and make friends, and it doesn't lead for a very happy adolescence. And I guess you could say I found some solace in heavy music, and all of that was a good outlet for that. And then my dad wasn't a big fan of the bands that I was getting into, like Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, Cannibal Corpse, things of that nature. And I remember listening to, I think it was after I had managed to tape trade and get Master of Puppets. My dad was like, what is this? And I just explained it was, I liked it for the guitars, drums, all of that. And so my dad took me to what used to be disc jockey. I think it's called FYE now, but it used to be disc jockey. Introduced me to Van Halen, and I heard Eruption for the first time, and I was like, okay, I want to learn to do that. And so my dad made me take my mom's old acoustic. It was like that size. It's not very big at all. And I had to learn Stairway to Heaven on it to show that I had some commitment. And then I did that. He didn't care that I couldn't really play the solo very well, but I got through it enough that, he's like, okay, we can make the argument to get an electric guitar, and it just kind of went from there.
To learn some of these musical scores of greatness, and hopefully didn't piss off too many guitar centers along the way. I think there's a huge signs in most of these that say no Stairway to Heaven.
No, I played it at home. No, I just played it at home, and then my dad went and got me my first guitar. And
great. That's awesome. Yeah. So I guess before we move on to the career path, I guess what was an important memory that you had that you shared with your dad? And it could be with music or not.
I would say definitely like some of the best memories I have with my dad is like when I was younger. I got old enough, he would take me fishing, and we would it would become like a family outing kind of thing. It was just something me and him did. We got away from the house. We got away from my mom and sister, and just kind of, it was kind of like guys doing guy stuff, sitting there in silence, trying to catch fish and release them, because most of the places were catch and release. You couldn't keep anything. Not
that's
that
fair.
Anybody would really want to, but that's beside the point. There was a lot of funny moments too. Like I remember when I got older and started, growing my hair out and playing guitar, my dad would always be like, "What the hell are you listening to?" It was like when I first was introduced to the band Cradle of Filth, I was listening to Dusk and Her Embrace. And my dad was like, "What the hell is that you're listening to with all that screeching shit?" Is exactly what I said. Well, it's this band called Cradle of Filth, and he was like, "Yeah, it's a cradle of something, all right," and just kind of shook his head and kind of left me to my own devices back there, sitting there trying to learn how to play the riffs and stuff. And then I kind of got interested in trying to do vocals, so I tried to like see if I could screech as high pitched as all of that, and so that was kind of, I would say that would be the beginning of the kind of the individuation process of trying to individuate away from the family, trying to, be my own person. And that caused a lot of disagreements, butting heads, things, the standard part of, when you're trying to be, you think you know everything and you don't know at all. And
the privileges of youth.
Yes.
So you start this process of becoming your own man, and you, from a career perspective, you started off in IT, and then you started going into psychology. So I guess why choose IT, and then why the change?
So we had moved out to Nevada. That was about 2011. That was when me and Christina, it was after we got married, we moved to Nevada. She started working at the gold mines, and of course, I just moving to the area, no college education, just high school. You know, the only opportunities were really working retail at like either the grocery store, the Home Depot, or my first job in Nevada was going back to pizza delivery, which was something I did as a musician because you could collect tips and save all of that and then use that money to go play on the weekend somewhere. So I started the pizza delivery thing. My wife was like, you know, you could always do computer technology, get on as an IT person with Barrick and make really good money. Okay, sure. You know, I could do the associates of applied sciences and computer information technology, and you know, do that. But I mean, the classes were so bloody boring that it was awful. There was no the classes were either online, so there was no really in-person classes. All the certifications were done through this website and it was the presentations were so damn boring. I fell asleep a couple of times at the table doing them. But part of the general education process was like Psych 101, music. There was a theater class and all of that. It's just, you know, it's basic like college liberal arts things you could learn. You have to take a little bit of everything. And when I took Psych 101, it just something there caught my interest, and then I decided to follow that.
Okay, and so now you're going head deep into, or you're charging forward into psychology, which is awesome. And like, we've had a lot of great conversations. Would you mind letting our listeners know, I guess, what are the big, if you were to pick 3 people and or works, right? What are they that have been formative or like awakened you to psychology?
So I would say the first one was, Margaret Heaton. She was the professor that taught Psych 101. Just kind of the way that she taught it made it interesting. And of course, when we went over the section with like Freud, I had read some of Freud's work and read about Freud's work previously because, you know, I was, you know, young growing up. You know, we didn't have TV, so I read a lot about a lot of different things just because we didn't have a TV, and I hadn't started playing guitar nonstop yet. So, you know, there's a period of time where I was at the library just reading anything and everything that caught my interest. And so I was familiar with Freud, but when she talked about Jung's work, I mean, it just kind of like, okay, that's kind of interesting with like the archetypes and stuff, but I didn't really think too much about it at the time. And then I would say the second person within that was Stephanie Davis. She was the chair for the social sciences department. She's the one that taught social psychology. That's where I thought about going first, with social psychology. But the thing about the research methods is there's a lot of experiments that are done in the wild rather than in a lab. So there's too many variables you can't really account for. So I wasn't a fan of the research methodology, but what social psychology was investigating, I thought was interesting. And then I would say the third important is, there's really 4 important professors throughout my academic career that stand out. One is Dr. Lori Walsh. She has a PhD in anthropology. She worked with the Australian Aborigines there for a bit for her field work, and you know, she didn't push the nonsense in the anthropology that you see now. It's actual anthropology, and it was pretty interesting. And then of course there's Dr. Jonathan Foster. He was the history professor, and he was the one that really kept things, like the way he taught history. He said you have to keep historical context at the forefront of the mind. You can't just paste things for today's moral standpoint and try to paste it onto the past. You can't do that. The history has a context, and you can't alter that, or else trying to figure out the history, it muddles it to the point that it's like it's almost like a distortion of what it was, rather than keeping it within its appropriate context.
So I got Margaret Heaton, Lori Walsh, and Jonathan Foster as your three big people.
And Stephanie Davis. She's in there too, because she was, like I said, she was the social sciences chair. She taught all of the psychology classes after Miss Heaton left to work on her dissertation.
Okay. And so in the psychology field that you're in, I guess what has been the most rewarding aspect of being a psychologist?
It's the learning. It's really what it is. I mean, psychology, its base definition is a study of the human mind and how it behaves, and so there's a lot of learning and being able to learn and then apply what you learn, especially like in a clinical perspective, I think that's what I find really, really rewarding, is that I'm learning all of this stuff, but then I'm also able to apply it. That's one of the reasons too that I think I've gravitated more toward clinical rather than just social psychology, because there's not really a whole lot you can apply with social psychology like you can with the clinical realm.
And from this process, I guess, like, there's that professional side that you hit on just then, and has it bled at all into the personal life, the personal aspect of Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we, I don't think it's a secret here. Like you said, we talk about the same things. We're influenced by a lot of the same people. So, with Dr. Peterson talking about meaning, and that's something that Viktor Frankl, that's something Bisping and Boss, who are two existential psychoanalysts, have talked about is meaning. And so it's like, okay, if meaning is to be found in responsibility, that's Peterson's postulate, which is predicated on Frankl's work, then, it doesn't matter how you might feel about your job or whatever's going on in life. If you can find something that you can be responsible for, that can, because you're responsible for it, it means that someone's counting on you. That's one component to finding meaning that can get you through that, so that way you don't become bitter and resentful and because then you're not willing to do the things that you need to do, or at least not do them to the best of your ability, because who cares?
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I have to unfortunately agree with you on multiple accounts, and I think that's a question that we can get into later as well. So I get last question on the personal side, and then we're going to start kind of jumping into some other topics. Okay. Is from a family stance, what's been the most important aspect of your family life for you, and how has it helped propel you forward?
I'd say the best aspect of my family life is that I have a wife that supports me, but not in the sense of you better do this or else something, or else you're going to be in trouble, but more of a, hey, why don't you do this? Because doing this will actually be more worthwhile and it'll be more valuable to you. So, for example, before we got married, I was a heavy drinker, and she wanted me to stop, but not so much because she was aggravated with the drinking, but wanted me to stop the heavy drinking for what was best for me. It wasn't about her. She didn't say, well, you're quitting drinking for me. She's like, you need to quit drinking for you, because if you're going to try to pursue a career in psychology, and that takes a lot of mental capacity to do that, and you're sitting there killing brain cells, every weekend, drowning a bunch of like hard liquor and alcohol, then that's obviously not very good for that. So, she supported me in making decisions that were the best for me, not for what was best for her. So there was a selflessness in that.
That's pretty great. That's always good to hear. All right, Sean. So we talked about your life so far, and we kind of hit on some highlights and some stuff like that. So that's really great, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that for our guest. And when it comes to our first bucket of the meeting forge, that's the hammer. And I want to kind of dial in on a few things besides the bug that just came on my nose. One is what has been the hardest part about making yourself right now? And then we'll start getting into some of the other stuff.
The hardest part of making me into who I am today was growing up. Because there was a time I was a 20-year-old child, and and that kind of carried into the early, I would say, into the early to mid 30s as well. And that a lot of that was, wanting to cling on to adolescence in a sense. One of the things I don't really talk a whole lot about is so I lost my mom when I was 20 and my dad before I was 21. So they died within 14 months of each other. My mom to breast cancer, and my dad kind of died of an aneurysm in his sleep. That will knock the knees out from under anyone, even in the best circumstances. So, I played music, drank a lot of alcohol. That was the 20s. That was my trying to cope with that, and tried to carry that with me through my 30s. I think it was because you have this idea of invulnerability, but at the same time, there's also a vulnerability to that, because it's like you don't expect something like that to happen, and it does. And so you try to defend against that death anxiety. And so you buy into your own invulnerability. And sometimes the way to do that is to kind of arrest your own development, because you think, well, if you're going to get older, then you're going to die. And that's not the right way of doing anything, because all that does is it basically, you try to absolve yourself of any responsibility for yourself so that you can go out, have a good time, and try to live your life, let's say. But you're not really living. All you're doing is living a lie, because as people don't get so thrilled about you when you get into your 30s to your mid 30s and you're still trying to act like you're 19 or 20 and invincible and bulletproof and all of that, because at that point it's like, come on, you're an adult. It's time to kind of get that sorted out and get you on the right path somewhere, so that you could at least make something of yourself, rather than just being stuck in the arrested development stage of trying to be like a 40-year-old teenager. There's nothing really good about that.
So here we are, we're in the forge of this metaphorical forge, and you're pulling in a lot of these different materials. What have been, I think some of the good materials, for example, have been like the influences of your professors, influence of Jordan Peterson, Viktor Frankl, some of these other major, Nietzsche to an extent. Is there like maybe one or two additional sources or materials that have helped you make who you are today? And why are they important?
Well, I would say my wife Christina was definitely a major important factor in them, because she's the one that pushed me to figure something out and say, look, this may have been cool when you were 20, and yeah, this was definitely cool when you were 29, 30, before we, while we were dating, before we got married, and even within the first couple of years of marriage. But there came a point when she was like, I can't be the only grown up in the house. And so, her bluntness about it, but also her support for wanting what's best for me. Not like, again, it wasn't about her, all about her. It was about making me a competent partner in which she could actually have a decent marriage with, rather than being the dominant partner.
Okay.
I think so. So there was that, and then and you know, Carl Jung. When I started reading a lot of Jung's work, especially when it came to becoming a genuine integrated personality and trying to do that, I would say that that was definitely a big part of that as well.
Okay. That makes more sense. And then, so besides this, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? So besides this stasis aspect that occurred, and I kind of want to allude to that in the next question, but as far as a material or something like that, was there any bad materials that just shouldn't have been forged together?
I would say my parents' death is definitely something that shouldn't have really been, you know, premature. I would say, you know, premature in the context of most parents are around till you're about 40, 50, even sometimes up into your 60s if you're lucky. But in the same token, it's also, that's part of life. That's part of existence. And that's kind of where Irvin Yalom talks about death as a necessary part of existence. And so to truly live and exist, you have to acknowledge that, not be so afraid of it. You know, it's going to happen to everybody.
I guess, is there something in your internal locus of control that you wish you didn't add in?
Yeah, I would say, you know, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have went to college and been like, you know, the odds of being this big major rock star, it's not going to happen. Playing music's fun, don't get me wrong, but it's not worth spending 8 years of your life making $120 at a bar, and you're spending $200, $300 to go travel for a weekend. So you're eating up a portion of your weekly wages, because you know, like I said, I did pizza delivery for a bit. I was an electrician for a few years. I did HVAC. I worked for Asplin Tree Company. So I did a lot of manual labor jobs that paid very well. But most of that money was being saved up so that we could go travel and party it up on the weekend. And then, you know, you get home about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, and you go to bed just to get up 4 hours later and then drag your hungover self back to work. You know, I would say that I could have done a lot better if I hadn't have done all of that.
So I guess, would it be fair to say that it's less material and more procedure, right? Because like, if you've watched Forged in Fire, for example, right, like they'll be like, you quenched it the wrong way, or you, whatever the case may be. Like normally it's not the materials, it's the sequence of events that are kind of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, the great thing about being musically gifted, that's part of trait openness, for example. Well, high openness also means you're open to different ideas. And so that I would say that temperament is what, you know, I would say is also kind of what drew me into psychology. So it's not as big a surprise that I would be interested in ideas and how people think and how people act and all of that. But you're right. It's the procedure that's the problem. It wasn't the materials. It was the procedure. It was how it was my lack of coping and lack of coming to terms with things by, you know, trying to act like I was going to live forever, which that's obviously not going to happen.
I appreciate that insight. And so I guess as you started pulling yourself together, forcing these things together in some ways, you're making meaning in your life. Is there something that was revealed to you that wasn't necessarily intentional, or has everything been kind of intentional as you started to kind of see what you've been making?
It started becoming intentional as I saw what was happening. You know, the first thing is to stop, you know, self-deceiving yourself in your life, because you'll engage in the same stupid self-destructive behavior because you're willing to deceive yourself, saying, oh, well, you know, we can do a little less of this time than what we did last time. You know, we can have 1 beer less, or we can we're going to make an effort to try to stay sober. We're going to make an effort to do X, Y, or Z, right? And but you're already putting yourself in that position where you're setting yourself up for failure, but you're lying to yourself, or as Vervaeke would say, you're bullshitting yourself about it. And so, well, I mean, it's true.
You are, yeah, I know.
You know deep down you're not going to do what you say you're going to do. At this point, you're just playing a semantic game with yourself so that you can put yourself in that position.
Yeah, yeah. So you kind of pulled yourself together. Like you're in the forge, you're making yourself, and I think a good summary of kind of this is it's procedural based, right? It's this time that you've spent, like you had a critical event happen in your life, and we all have those, and in some ways you didn't want to. I'm trying. Let me know if I'm coming off wrong here, but there's an idea of growing up and facing that thing. You know, like we talk about it all the time, is taking responsibility, growing up, and finding those people and those relationships that are helpful, to help to actually propel you forward instead of leave you in a, I want to say, a vampiric state of stasis, right? You know, eternal youth.
Yeah.
So. So Sean, so now we're in the action, kind of like the action phase where you've made yourself, you are carrying yourself, and you kind of have a nice little showpiece on your side. I guess, how do you know that you're using this sword, or like, how do you know you're in the right spot in the right moment?
Well, your conscience will tell you if you're in the right situation or not. If you listen to it, you'll know. And there's different physiological signs for it. Like, for example, you know, like if you've ever been in trouble with a parent, that sinking feeling of your heart going into your stomach, that's a good indicator that you're not at the right place at the right time and that you've done something wrong. But knowing when you're right, that's when things are working well for you, and that's where time seems to pass a lot quicker than you would think. That's what is considered the flow state, and that Vervaeke's talked about that. Peterson's talked about that a little bit too. We laugh about it, but it's true that, you know, that flow state, or that state of meaning, that's when you're fully engaged with what you're doing and it just feels right, and so you can just keep with it. That's when you're in the right place at the right time, and what you're doing is meaningful because that meaning manifests itself. And if you're not where you're supposed to be, then your conscious will let you know that pretty quickly if you're willing to listen to it.
So here you are, you're going through the world. All of a sudden, you've, like, I think we've entered, like, can you describe that situation for you where you've entered into a flow state? Like what does that feel like for Sean?
Again, it's like you're doing something and you'll look over and say it's like 11 o'clock in the morning, and then you do what you're doing and you're in this flow of work, right? So like when I wrote my book that hasn't been published because I can't find a publisher interested in it, and that's that history of the lunatic asylum system from beginning to end, you know, I wrote like 2 chapters in the span of about 4 hours, and it didn't even feel like 4 hours. It felt like an hour. And I looked over at my desk, you know, the time on the computer, and it's like, it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, holy hell, where'd the time go? And it's like, because I was engaging with what I was doing. It was meaningful. It's because it's what I thought I ought to do, because, you know, it's one of those pet project things. And so that's kind of, that's kind of what that flow state's kind of like for me, is that, you know, time seems to pass a lot quicker than it should because I'm fully engaged in what I'm doing.
And I guess I'm sure there's been times where that's the exact opposite is what, like, you have a hard time getting into the flow state. I guess how do you get through those moments, right, where you're, you know, life sucks,
Well, it goes back to, I guess, a military saying that I'm sure you're familiar with, and it's embrace the suck, right? No, seriously, like if you're
Yes.
if you're asked to do something that's incredibly difficult, or that you find that it's just, there's 100 other things that you would rather be doing than what that is. You have to find, what is important about doing this task, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when I worked at the Home Depot and was over my head as a department supervisor, it's like, here I'm given this task that I really don't want to do, that I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. It's like, okay, look, just do the best you can. There's a reason why you're being asked to do this. They're counting on you to do this, meaning, the assistant managers, the people that were over me, expect this to be done. They're counting on me to do this. It's not going to be fun, but we have to do it. So that's kind of taking responsibility for it. It's not, hey, you guys here, you get a few associates under you that you can delegate this task to. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. They asked me to take care of this. I'm going to do this. And so little by little, that 6-hour period of time felt more like 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you look at the watch and it's like, oh, only 15 minutes went by. It's that bad. But at the same time, it's like, you kind of have to embrace the suck, suck it up and do it.
Yep. I would agree with you. Sometimes that's just what life is. And maybe you would agree with me that there's those moments as well can help build meaningful relationships with people, even though the task is terrible. So I don't know. That's just something that I've noticed. Have you noticed something to that effect where?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because, I never said no. So when there was times, like even before it was the, you got to get yourself together kind of thing. I used to be very hot-headed and temperamental and rude to people, just because if I was having a bad day, just make everybody else miserable. Why not? There's probably many instances that I could have been let go from that job, but because I was willing to do the task that some people would just be flat out refuse to do, but I would do it. They saw past the misbehavior, for a lack of better word. And but once I started getting myself together and stopping that kind of thing, things got a lot better. Not only just because from just say a pragmatic stance of, you got one guy who will do what you ask him to do and won't complain about it, but now dude's finding reason to do it. Much pleasant demeanor at work. And I think all of those things together just kind of, things started to turn around, and that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And I guess the last question I kind of want to talk about, and with the sword and whatnot, has there ever been a situation where your sword was clearly inadequate for the job? And it's not just embrace the suck in some regard.
There's a thing called imposter syndrome. So when I first started at Central State, I had the cursory book knowledge, going in with, while still working on my master's that I had completed, in 2019. When I started there at Central State in 2018, it's like, I have all the cursory knowledge. You go in with this attitude of, okay, I've read the books. I know what to expect. You get out there, and textbook and real life are not the same thing. And so I totally freaked out. Was like, oh God, what the hell have I got myself into? This is not really an environment that I know what I'm doing. Everything is wrong. But you orient to it. You eventually get oriented to the environment. You get oriented to what's going on. You start to habituate to it. You start to kind of learn. So there's that participatory knowing. You start to learn things as you, you laugh about it, but it's definitely true that's what that is.
No, I agree with you. I just think it's, on a personal note, it's you're going through the awakening from the meaning crisis, and for everyone watching, I'll link it in the description. It is a great 50 hours of anyone's life
Well, not to mention that, but everything that, I mean, I sit there and call it orienting, and I also call it habituation, right? So those are two technical terms from psychology. But when you look at it as knowing as participatory knowing, it's participatory learning in the sense that as you orient yourself to the environment, you're learning your environment. As you orient to the job and to integrate into that, then what you're doing is you're going from participatory learning to participatory knowing, and then you're going from believing that you can do the job to acting out the belief that you can do the job. And it's the same thing that happened when I went from the nursing department as a psychiatric tech to a psychology assistant there at Central State. I'd never done groups before, had absolutely no idea what the hell was going on. And so I had to be like, okay, well, so there's the archetype of the wise old man, right? That's the archetypal teacher. Okay, so when you're teaching restoration and injury psychoeducation groups, it's like, okay, I can act out the part of a professor teaching this. So I'm teaching people the basics of the court system. I'm going through these scenarios that show that allow a patient to show that they can rationally understand the court system and how to make rational choices with an attorney. So, for example, there's I call this a vignette stalker Steve, where this guy named Steve has been following around this girl, writing her letters, threatening her, and calling all these emails. It's like, do you think the state has a good case against Steve? Why do you think that? Okay, what evidence supports the case against Steve? Okay, do you think Steve should plead this? What happens if he pleads this? Well, if the prosecution decides to give a plea deal, should Steve take it? Those are the types of things that show rational understanding, and we can kind of teach that in a sense. The injury psychoeducation, these are people that have been acquitted via not guilty by reason of insanity, and so then you're just teaching them the process by which you kind of go through maximum security to civil transfer to back out in the community and what it takes to get through that process. That's teaching. I had to read books on group therapy and then try to act that out. And you know, it wasn't until toward the end of my time there at the state hospital that I understood how to do a group. And that took participating in it, failing in it, and being able to learn from what you did wrong and keep what you did right, and then try to do more of that and hope for the best.
All right. So now we've made ourselves. We have forged something, a sword, a tool, something to help us move through the world a little bit better and change our mode of being a little bit. And now we're to the pen. And this is the question that I like to ask with the pen. 2,000 years from now, you are now nothing more than a myth, essentially. What do you want people to remember you for?
Any contributions that I can make for either the field of psychology or any contributions toward, you know, our culture. Kind of, you know, like to think as, you know, Peterson's doing a lot for Jung. I would like to do the same thing when it comes to Peterson's work, and that's to, you know, expand it forward, right? And who knows, maybe there'll be either I'll have a student if I ever get to be a professor, or, you know, through, you know, YouTube lectures, that someone will take my work and try to continue it forward. And, you know, that would be cool. Do I expect that to happen? Not really, but it would be cool. But, you know, but
it's a noble goal to aim for, though, right? Like,
yeah, because it's not about fame. It's about finding something new and contributing new knowledge that could help people going forward, or, you know, it might help deepen our understanding of ourselves as human beings and the way we think about things.
Is there something about your legacy that you're worried about, like as far as something that maybe history won't be as kind to you about?
Oh, if there's any stories of any debauchery that I happen to have been around when I was playing as a musician, but
that's fair.
I would say that would be kind of bad. But as far as I would like to think that hopefully my legacy would be that I not only did I turn things around, but B, I've tried to stand up for truth and stand up for knowledge in the correct way of that.
Mm-hmm. I guess from a metaphysical perspective, do you think the pen and the sword have anything in common?
Well, yeah, they're weapons. You have the sword that you keep teeth unless you absolutely have to use it, and the pen's the weapon of convenience that you can use at any time.
Would you mind elaborating on some of that, and then how maybe we can be maybe charitable with our pens?
I would say as long as what you're trying to communicate, as long as it's grounded in truth and love and respect. And I don't mean that in the fluffy respect sense, but to have a genuine respect for the truth and for the individual that you're trying to communicate with, or say the individuals that you're writing for, as long as you're using the pen in that way, that you are being charitable. But truth is a very powerful thing, because I mean, if you look at our culture today, those who tell the truth are the most despised for it. And so, the sword is something that you use only when absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. That's like the last resort is the sword, whereas the pen should be, your only resort.
I like to equate, reading people's thoughts and stuff like that as the real method, like the real methodology for convincing someone, because it's only through that internal processing that you actually can change your mind, I think, in some ways. So,
well, yeah, and you change people's minds through charity, not through blunt force.
I would agree with you on that. Even if the words are very blunt, I would even caution with that. Sometimes, like, there can be bluntness in the truth, but it can't be disguised or coded by rhetoric.
In other words, if you want somebody to be blunt and be bluntly honest with you, you want it up front. You don't want it to be hidden. You don't want it to be falsehood masquerading as truth, even if the statement is true. The way it's delivered can be absolutely false, and that's just the same as lying. Yep.
Oh man, I totally messed up the hair.
It's okay.
All right, so Sean, so now we're on the crown, and the crown is self-discipline, leading others, and then in some cases it can be achievement. I think one of the major topics I kind of want to dial in with you is this idea of self-discipline, and holding yourself to that. What has been the hardest thing about disciplining yourself to become a better person?
Distractibility. There's so many things out there that are just distractions. Your smartphone's a distraction. Video games are a distraction. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of things in everyday life that are just not pleasant, that people, obviously don't want to do. Like, for example, before I terminated, when I was pursuing that second master's, like, some of the classes were awful, and so instead of paying attention to class, I'd have my phone up here and I'd be playing a little game on my phone, or if there's housework to be done, there's always that temptation there to go play video games, whether it be Skyrim, Fallout, or what have you. So the hard part about that is that you have to make a bargain with yourself. Be like, yes, you want to do this or that, but we kind of have to do this first. And so it's, But I also found that what's interesting and worthwhile is what helps you discipline yourself. Because if it's something that you have to do that you kind of enjoy, the bargaining with yourself goes much smoother than if it's something that you just absolutely don't find worthwhile. If you don't want to guilt yourself over not doing what you need to do, because all that does is cause negative emotion. You're going to withdraw from it even further, and that's no good because then things don't get done. But you have to set a worthwhile goal, and then you have to kind of aim at it. But it's also your responsibility that if you're setting the aim, then you need to follow through with that, because then if there's any failure in that, then it's on you.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And so with that, right, you have to, what are some of your methods for achieving that bargain, that sacrifice with the future?
Scheduling your time. As much as this is something I learned from my wife, Christina. Get you a planner or a calendar or something. Break your day down.
Yeah.
It's like God, with my knees being the way they are. Sometimes it sucks after you try to ride 10 or 15 miles on a bike, but it's like, what do you want? It's like, well, you want to be healthy, right? Well, how are you going to do that? Because right now it's not worth it to go 40 minutes down the road to the gym. And then especially if you can't get in there because of the capacity problems and you have to turn around and drive back, that's no good. That's just an excuse not to do what you have to do. So you have to schedule your time and you have to make it a habit. I think it's like you have to do something like 7 days to make it a habit. So, as much as it sucks, it's like, make it a habit.
Yep.
Especially if it's a good habit, make it a habit, because then it's like, then if you don't do it, you feel like crap the next day. It's like, oh, well, that's because you kind of let yourself down a bit. But that's also will motivate you to pick yourself back up, get back on track. It's not easy, and by no means is anybody going to be perfect, but I mean, it's something that you could strive for at least.
What from the habit perspective, right? And I'm like, is there a psychological impact to having habits?
Well, yeah. If you improve the things that you make a habit every day, then your day gets that much better. It's like, what's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning? You make your bed, right? Well, work on that. Make it. No, seriously. You think it's funny, and it's because you might think it's funny because Peterson has said it. Jocko Willink has said it.
There's a whole book that says "Make Your Bed." It's old Navy admiral. Talks about it in the SEALs.
About that. Yeah, because I think Christina sent me a link to one of his talks, and she's like Jordan Peterson of the Navy. But it's true. but it's true that if you can improve on those things that you do habitually every day, whether it's making your bed, brushing your teeth, housework, like if you clean your house a little bit every day, or if you do it 1 day a week where you just spend cleaning from top to bottom, you improve that. When you improve in that to where you can be efficient at it, that actually buys you more time in the future that you can set aside for whatever it is that you want to do.
Yep.
So it's getting those micro routines as tweaked to where you can do them as efficiently as possible allows you more time in the future for the things that you have, that you either A, want to do, or B, that you need to do.
Mm-hmm. And then from the other aspect of this, so like we talked about leading yourself, right? And the importance of habits. That's, I think we can both agree is extremely useful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you translate that to other people, like leading others, you said that you were in group, like you led group therapy. What was the most challenging part of being a leader, and what did you learn from it?
The most challenging part is getting people to actually participate in group, because when you're doing group therapy for, like, say, anger management, for example, nobody wants to admit to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn to either A, sit with awkward silence, which is absolutely uncomfortable, but you have to learn the awkward silence is part of the process. And then it's just you once you can get people comfortable with one another, you can with like icebreaker activities or whatever. Like we did Jung's word association test to try to see what people's associations were and where they came up with some of their associations. Then the idea of leader, you tend to want to no longer be up front trying to get people to do things, but to kind of sit back and just kind of guide how things go. You want to ask people, well, what does this mean to you? Or what do you think about what so-and-so said? Or how would you have handled this? You know, what's your perspective? So then the idea is to get the group dynamic to where the group kind of helps sort each other out rather than group leader trying to facilitate that person or persons trying to sort themselves out. They kind of go from being a passive participant to an active participant, whereas the group leadership goes from an active to a passive leadership role.
I actually like that a lot. I haven't heard it said that way. Active to like the active role to the passive role. Like that's why like in most leadership literature and stuff like that, they talk about the difference between managing and leading, and you know where you place yourself. So I appreciate that as well. I really do like that.
Well, I mean, Lao Tse, who was a philosopher in Korea. In fact, his nickname was the Confucius of Korea among some Western philosophers. And I learned this when I took Taekwondo when I was a teenager, and this is something that really stuck with me. And it's like, a leader is best when people barely knows he exists. Not so good when he's obeyed and acclaimed, worse when he's despised. But if a good leader, when the work is done and the aims are fulfilled, they'll say they did it themselves.
A good leader will say they did it themselves?
When the work is done and the aims are fulfilled, we'll say we did it ourselves, or they'll say they did it themselves.
Yes. It's that idea of empowerment and I would say in some regards it's giving people a sword, right? Like in some regard, like giving a piece of yourself that you've made. And that, for me, that's what I find to be a really empowering aspect of being a leader. So
yeah. And you know, and part of that too is, you know, when I remember when I first started at the Home Depot, and I had a pretty couple awful department supervisors. And there was one in particular, I said, you know, I would never be like that. Mm-hmm. I would be there in the trenches with everybody else. And so when I got moved up to the garden supervisor, that was one thing is like, you know, I didn't just delegate stuff and go run off. I was like, if we had to stack block to down so that we could put new block in, I was like, okay, I'll climb up here and I'll hand you the stuff. Let's just get this taken care of. We can do this. You know, there wasn't a you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It's like, okay, let's get this taken care of. If it's like, if I had to delegate, it's like, hey, if you'll take care of A and B, so and so take care of C and D, I'll go do F and G, and then whoever gets done, and you know, we'll meet up and see who needs help, so that way we can get this stuff done. It was never about me telling you what you're going to do. It's like, hey, there's these things that we need to get taken care of, and I'm right there with you. Let's just get this taken care of.
Yeah, that's admirable, and it's a step that many leaders initially will skip and then come back to later on in their leadership journey. Unfortunately, and fortunately, because I think at some level people have to learn, and that's how they learn is through making those mistakes or whatnot. So. All right, Sean. So we've been talking for about almost an hour now. We've kind of gone through your life. We talked about how you've made yourself, how you've kind of carried yourself, and then what your hopes and dreams are, what legacy you hope to leave, and then finally your leadership and both self and outward. So I appreciate you taking the time today to do all that, and coming on the Meaning Forge with me. So in summary, there's something that I kind of just want to make sure I'm catching. Like there's an essence in this conversation I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. And one of the major motifs that I see is growing up and facing the things you don't want to face. Mm-hmm. And along with that, there's this idea of learning nonstop and then applying what you've learned to the spheres that you're operating in. Does that sound right so far?
Oh yeah, that definitely sounds right. Cycle of learn. So every time you learn something new, some old part of you has to die, right? Because there might be some knowledge that was insufficient that you operated under that kind of motivated your actions or whatever. Mm-hmm. You learn something new, then that part of you has to die, and some new part has to be born and has to grow. And that's the process of learning. Is this renewal, this mm-hmm. these little deaths and rebirths kind of thing, and that's and I think that is a motif that we all share. That's you could say that's like the archetypical hero's journey. You know, the hero has to gain new knowledge and replace the old so that he can continue on his quest for whatever it is that he's questing after, whether it's to save the girl or get some sort of treasure that saves the kingdom. That's really what learning is. It's a hero's journey in a sense, if you will take to the learning honestly.
Perfect. And then I guess, so we've gone over your top 3 people that have been influential to you. Mm-hmm. What have been the top 3 books that have been influential to you?
The top 3 books that have been influential. Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. That was definitely what helped me get myself together and to where I could actually aim at something coherent that was actually grounded in some sense of reality that was manageable. Mm-hmm. I would say the next book that I would say is influential is the Gulag Archipelago. Again, it's one of those books that, and this is why it's not because, Jordan Peterson, said famously on Joe Rogan, read the Gulag Archipelago or the Gulag Archipelago and sort yourself out. No. Solzhenitsyn took a real honest look at his life when he was in the camps and really came to terms with his behaviors and actions that led up to his arrest, and had to be honest about his own self-deception on how he thought he was this perfect, communist adherent, and how actually he played a role in the continued tyranny and corruption of the state. And it was through his contributions to that led to his arrest. And yet he says, if it wasn't for this arrest, I would never have had the awakening that I've had. So he had to gain some insight as to what the hell put him there. And then he had to figure out, well, what am I going to do about me being in this camp? And realize that, writing his books, because there was A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich that came out that kind of really opened up a small window into what camp life was like and what was actually going on in the Soviet Union with the concentration camps for political prisoners. And then when the Gulag Archipelago came out, I would say it took the doors and just flew them right open where everybody saw that. But that was because Solzhenitsyn was honest about the things that he did in life, his insufficiencies, his flaws, and his continual participation in a corrupt system that, just as he put it, it was like organs, it just ate people up and crapped them out, like sewage. And that's actually his metaphor, is it shit people out through the system like sewage. And so it's influential because you have to take an honest look in your life. If you're going to try to improve your life, you have to take an honest look. I'm not saying you have to be too hard on yourself, but you have to be careful of putting yourself on the pedestal that you don't belong being on. Mm-hmm. And then third influential book. I would say that would have to be God, that's a tough one. I'd say it would Man's Search for a Soul by Carl Jung. It really,
I was actually fighting with Viktor Frankl. I thought you were going to say Viktor Frankl for a minute.
that is an influential book too, but I think because in Modern Man in Search for a Soul, Jung kind of makes the argument about, you know, being an individual and being a genuine, truthful individual. And that's how you prevent having a shattered psyche, is everything has to be integrated together.
Yep. And that's kind of one of the ideas behind the Meaning Forge too, is, you know, like, even though we sit down and we took your buckets, right? Like, we ask questions about who you are. We ask questions about, you know, your career path and stuff like that, your relationships. End of the day, all those things have to be either pointing to or have a firm foundation underneath. However people want to, you know, picture that, it's helpful. But typically speaking, like, you have to have these meaning and purpose, and then these other aspects, because at the end of the day, everything else is temporary.
Absolutely.
And if this one thing falls away, and, like, let's say you put all your eggs in one basket, typically those eggs are in family and career. Family can go away, your career can go away. I mean, granted, I don't want, like, that's the worst case scenario in a lot of people's lives, but people are shattered from these things, and they have nothing to hold them up, nothing to look at and, you know, wish upon a star and aim at the highest ideal. So
we've integrated Jordan Peterson and Pinocchio from Maps of Meaning, which it's only fitting because I mentioned Vervaeke, and, you know, some of the concepts from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and
yes, it's also what you're studying right now, and typically speaking, when people are studying in a particular moment, it's most salient to them, and they're going to find ways to apply it, like any number of different things. And so, Jonathan Vervaeke is a great series. Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning is a great series as well. And I highly encourage anyone to look into those.
Oh yeah, I can. Now we just need Jonathan Haidt to do a lecture series on morality and put it on YouTube. I think that would be
We're so close. But okay, so one more question before we get into your final words.
Okay.
And top 3 heavy metal songs.
Oh God, you had to do that, didn't you? Master of Puppets is a classic, hands down. Master of Puppets. Number 2. Metallica, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I hate to use the same band for the 2 songs, but I mean, come on. It's really a close first and second there. Third one I would have to say would have to be, for me, Freezing Moon by Mayhem.
Okay.
I hope you guys have enjoyed this time that I took here on the Meaning Forge. I would say you matter, and it's not only do you matter, but you have the time available to you to find something that is worthwhile to you. You can do it. You just need to figure out what it is, take responsibility for it, map out how you're going to achieve that. Hopefully you're aiming at something at the highest good that you could imagine, and just, you know, work toward it. That's your responsibility, because you matter. And if you believe that you matter and that everything that you do matters, then that's your path to a meaningful life that's going to be best for you, best for your family, and best for your community. And so don't just sit here, you know, go make it happen.